Well, hello everyone. Yes, we are back outside today. Kind of a class tradition. We do a review and we go outside. And I know we only had one review for the midterm, but when we only met for a couple weeks, you got to take your traditions as they come. So anyway, today's a review. We are back outside. So in keeping with that, there I am. All right, standing outside, or at least pretending to, for our class today. All right, let's take a look at what we have coming up, and then we'll jump into the review. And there we go. Can't bring our whiteboard outside, so we're back to our chalkboard in the grass here. So let's see. So the Chapter 14 quiz, Wednesday at midnight. Obviously, that's it, the last quiz. And then your team member evaluations for your business plan, also Wednesday at midnight. And then, of course, the final. So the final is on 6 chapters, 8 through 10 and 12 through 14. And it's going to be Monday between 2 and 6. You just log on to Blackboard, and it will be there. You've got 2 hours to take it. You'll take it just like you have the quizzes. So obviously, if you have questions on anything, just let me know. Happy to answer those. In terms of the points, as it is 110 questions, the exam is worth 150 points. So on Blackboard, I'll just convert whatever your score is to a 150 scale. So for example, if you get 96 out of 110, well, that would normally convert to about an 87 out of 100 in a typical scale. I'll convert that to 131 out of 150. So you'll see 131 in Blackboard. Again, if you have questions on anything, just let me know. And with that, we're going to start our review. And just remember, a review is just that. We've already been through this information once in our video lectures, and the slides are online, as you know. So you can go back and look at those video lectures. You can review the slides. Obviously, you can email me if you have any questions. But the purpose of this is just to kind of quickly go through and talk about some of the high points we hit and some of the things that you certainly need to keep in mind for the final. If you remember at the midterm, we went through 7 chapters in about an hour. So went through it pretty quickly. So again, we'll be going through these relatively quickly because it's a review. And with that, let's kick it off with Chapter 8. So those are what shows in your study guide for Chapter 8. And let's start with work teams and empowerment, because we kind of looked at those together. And when we talked about work teams, we talked about 4 different types: manager-led, self-managing, cross-functional, and virtual. Manager-led being obvious, led by the manager. With self-managing, that's where we use that term empowerment. Empowerment, which really just means to give employees authority and responsibility to make decisions about their work. You empower them. We looked at cross-functional teams from different functions, from different areas of the business, such as IT and production and sales and marketing. And then finally, we talked about virtual teams, which you're seeing a lot of with the whole coronavirus, right? People can't get into the office. So a virtual team is just that, geographically dispersed employees who meet using technology. So 4 different types of teams. So next we talked about team cohesiveness and groupthink, and we kind of put those together. And we said team cohesiveness is really how team members feel attracted to a team and motivated to remain part of it. That's a cohesive team. If you're attracted to it and you like it, you want to be part of it. And then we looked at the phenomenon of groupthink. Groupthink. And we showed the video of the Challenger explosion, right? The one with Krista McAuliffe, the teacher, that exploded 73 seconds after liftoff. And that's how we talked about groupthink, which is the tendency of people to conform to group pressure. It's peer pressure, right? And it's people not wanting to disagree because they don't want to feel like they're going against everybody else. Groupthink. And some ways to combat that we talked about. The leader of the group could go last. so their decisions don't influence everybody else. You could assign somebody to be a devil's advocate, that no matter what everybody says, that person will disagree. You could consult an outsider, so you bring someone in from the outside. And really, you just want to have a culture where people feel free to challenge, where it's not just, oh, this is a culture of agreement, and this is a culture of we just going to be cohesive all the time. You want to have a culture where people are free to speak their minds. So next we looked at team conflict. And one of the things we said was conflict can improve in performance, right? Conflict can be good if it's the right type of conflict. And we talked about two types, cognitive and effective. And cognitive is a good type of conflict. It focuses on problem-related differences of opinion. It's fine to have different opinions. You want that. So that's good. What you don't want is effective conflict, where it becomes personal, right? And people start insulting each other. That's what you don't want. And then we also talked about what happens if you have a bad team member. That can cause conflict. And we showed a video on that too, if you might remember. And we talked about you could accommodate, you could compromise, you could collaborate. And we said collaborating is probably the best way to try to fix it. Discuss things privately with the individual, see if you can arrive at a solution. Determine what the core problem of the individual is, and see if we can arrive at something that works for all parties. So, team conflict. And then we talked about various communication levels and formats. Internal, external, formal, informal, and then we also talked about the grapevine that is an informal communication channel. And when we talked about these, we started with internal is simply that, communication by people within an organization, whereas external is between parties inside and outside. For instance, customers, stockholders, the community, vendors, government. That's all external communication. And then we said formal communication is just along the chain of command, okay? And it's usually downward from the bosses and management downward to the employees. Excuse me. And we said it's important to also have upward, employee surveys, bosses listening to employees. We use the term MBWA, which is a term that Tom Peters, a management consultant, popularized. And it just means management by walking around. And so those are all ways of having upward formal communication. And then in terms of informal, we focused on the grapevine, which is just an internal information channel. It's just people talking within the company. And we said it's a frequent source of information in organizations. It conveys information quickly, and it's usually not wrong. The key as managers is you have to manage it so it's not the primary source of information. You want you to be the primary source of information. And so it generally helps if you're very transparent, if you're very open in your management style. That is a way to allow you to help manage the grapevine so it doesn't become the main source of information. And then we talked about various other communication forms. And one was written communication. And we talked about feedback. Feedback is simple. It's nothing more than information that you gather to confirm that somebody understood what you said, or it's going to help you improve your performance. Feedback. You've heard the term before. In terms of written communication, we looked at various different types. We looked at reports, letters, social media, and we really focused on emails. And we went through that list there of what's important for business emails. Things like having a meaningful subject line, making sure you're focused, assuming your email is going to be forwarded. Use respect. Don't reply all unless you need to, right? You don't want to do that. So all tips we talked about with business emails. And then we also talked about nonverbal communication, okay? Actions, behaviors rather than words, things like gestures, facial expressions. And we talked about it in terms of an interview. When we were meeting and we said, what are things you want to do in an interview or not want to do? A lot of things that you came up with were nonverbal communication, right? Firm handshake, look somebody in the eye, sit up straight, all types of nonverbal communication. And then presentation skills. Unfortunately, you won't have to do presentations in this class anymore. But we did talk about some things to think through when you're putting together presentations. And we used the 4 Ps. Plan, prepare, practice, and present. And you can read through what each of them are. Excuse me. And then finally, really the last thing we talked about in this chapter was PowerPoint slides. And you all just did that for your business plans. So hopefully you utilized some of this information, right? You want to use keywords and phrases. You don't want to get too wordy. You don't have to cover everything on the slide. It can just be those keywords, and then you speak through it. Have pictures and graphics. Have a font that contrasts with the background so it's easy to read. So those are some of the things we talked about with PowerPoint slides. And that was really it. Chapter 8 was a relatively short chapter. So those are the items we went through for Chapter 8. From there we moved on to Chapter 9, which of these 3 was really the meatiest, longest chapter. So we spent a little bit more time in the video on Chapter 9. And the first thing we talked about was guerrilla marketing. You all had to do it for your businesses, so you know what it is, right? It's innovative, unconventional, low-cost marketing efforts that are designed to attract attention. There are some examples. But again, innovative, unconventional, low-cost marketing efforts designed to attract attention. That's what guerrilla marketing is. Next, we talked about the target market and B2B, B2C together. So let's look at those two together. And with the target market, it's simply the group of people to whom you're going to direct your marketing efforts. Okay, you've got to determine who that target market is so you can really focus on that group of people. And then the difference between B2B and B2C markets, it's a function of who is buying the product. If it's consumer market, B2C, well, the people who are buying the product are those who are going to use it for themselves, for personal use, the end user. Whereas a B2B market is buyers who want to use the product for use in making other products. Okay? So that's B2B. B2B is business to business, B2C, business to consumer. Market segmentation was a similar concept, right? And we talked about you have to segment your market so you can determine your target market. Or once you have your target market, break it down, segment it. And there's 4 different ways to do that are listed there. Geographically, demographically, psychographically, and behaviorally. There's examples of the first 3. And then behaviorally really speaks to the frequency of use, right? We talked about rewards programs. Companies market to people who have rewards programs a little differently than everybody else because they know those are the frequent customers. Those are key to them. We talked about a customer pyramid that companies like mine used, where we had the most frequent customers on the top, and those are the ones we needed to focus on because they provided most of our business. So that was behavioral market segmentation. Marketing mix. So we talked about that. And we said that a marketing mix is really blending the 4 Ps. Product, price, place, and promotion. Blending the 4 Ps to fit the needs and preferences of your target market. And that's how we spent most of the chapter, is looking at those 4 Ps of the marketing mix. And we started with product, and we said, okay, we need to know how to design our product for our target market. We need to do some research to find out what they want. And we specified there's primary and secondary data in our market research. Primary being data that's collected firsthand, observation, surveys, interviews, focus groups, things like that. Whereas secondary data is previously published. It's more quick and inexpensive. Online searches, the Census Bureau, things like that. So two different types of market research. Then we spent a little time on branding strategies, and the concept of positioning that fits in with that. And we said a brand is name, design, or symbol or other features that differentiates a product from its competitors, right? And then positioning is simply the concept of establishing and differentiating the image of a brand so that consumers perceive it in a certain way. And consumers is italicized there because that's the important thing, is how consumers perceive your brand. It doesn't matter how you think of it, it really matters how consumers think of it. And then we talked about a few different branding strategies. Private branding, which is just the company sells the product, to a retailer who sells it under its own name. For example, Safeway Peas. That's private branding. Generic branding, there's no branding at all on the package, right? Just a description of the contents. It might be you see black and white labels in a grocery store. That's generic branding, generic drugs. And then we looked at manufacturer branding, right? We talked about multi-product branding, such as FedEx, where all their products are FedEx. FedEx Services, FedEx Ground, FedEx Freight, you name it. We said Google is pretty similar to that. Google Earth, Google Images, Google Docs, Google Maps, although they do have things like YouTube. But for the most part, Google is very similar to this. And then we said multi-branding is the other end of the spectrum. Unilever, perfect example. Unilever owns all these different brands, so they have multiple brands. Multiple brands. And that brought us to pricing strategies. You had to do this for your business plan, right? And pricing strategies, one thing we talked about was that research says that a consumer's perception of quality is closely related to price. Many consumers think if it's priced high, it must be quality. That's what research shows us. And so we looked at various pricing strategies. For new products, we looked at skimming, which is just setting the highest initial price that interested consumers would pay. Basically set a high price, right? Something that Apple does, set a high initial price for their products for those customers that want to buy it as soon as it comes out. And then penetration pricing is the opposite, a low initial price. This is much more common. And we also talked about a few other pricing strategies. Prestige, setting a high price, something Mercedes or Rolls-Royce would do. Odd-even pricing, $99.97 because it sounds less than $100. Cost-based pricing, common in retail. Figure out what your costs are and add markup. And then demand-based pricing, setting a price that the market, that you believe is appropriate for the market. So demand-based pricing. And that brought us to the second half of Chapter 9, where we talked about the promotional mix. But before that, we talked about not-for-profit marketing. And the question we asked was, do not-for-profits have to market in the first place? Do they? Well, the answer is, yes, they do. Because they compete for dollars also. They need to get funding. They have to reach their audience. They have to manage their image. So yes, nonprofits do have to market. And then with the promotional mix, we looked at the next 4 items there, right? Advertising, sales promotion, public relations, and personal selling. And we said that they really constituted the promotional mix, which is just how you communicate with your customers. And we looked at them one at a time. Started with advertising. Well, you all know what advertising is, right? Just paid communication designed to reach your product audience and create awareness of your product company. You know what that is. Personal selling, talked about that too, right? Just one-on-one communication with your customers, right? And we talked about these are the type of items that have it. Big ticket, might be complex, relatively few customers, you need that. And some of the examples we gave of products that use personal selling are cars, houses, insurance, jewelry. They all fit within that definition of groups that use personal selling. Sales promotion, we just talked about this briefly. Some tactics that some companies use. Not all, certainly not many B2B businesses, but some B2C businesses use this. And then finally, we talked about public relations. Public relations. And we said that's just really trying to garner favorable publicity for a company and or its products. That's public relations. And then we ended this chapter with a look at customer relationship management. We said that it's easier to keep existing customers than to get new ones. So customer relationship management was a critical concept in marketing, right? It's just nurturing and maintaining relationships with your current customers. And customer relationship management comes under the banner of relationship marketing. Relationship marketing is just maintaining relationships with everyone. Customers, vendors, suppliers, businesses that support you. Obviously, it's important to maintain good relationships with everybody. That's all relationship marketing. And then we close the chapter with talking about the 80-20 principle, which just says that approximately 80% of sales come from approximately 20% of customers for some businesses. Certainly not all, but for some. Typically B2B businesses. My firm, commercial real estate, pretty much worked for us. Accounting and advisory firms, attorneys, defense contractors, those type of industries, the 80-20 principle is really a useful thing to know, but not for every company. So that was the 80-20 principle. And that pretty much wrapped up Chapter 9 for us. That's all the different things we talked about, or we focused on in Chapter 9. And so with that, it's going to bring us to our final chapter. Yep. And this is the one where we had the cats. Right? Cat jumped on my keyboard, and we talked about the lemonade stand. So that's why those pictures are there. And this was a relatively brief chapter, similarly to Chapter 8. And we started talking about product development. And we said, when you develop a product, it's not just what do I want to sell. Obviously, you need to ask, what do my customers want to buy? Those are things you have to think through. And we looked at 4 different product development categories. Those 4 right there. We said new to the company, something like all-day breakfast when McDonald's introduced that. Other companies had all-day breakfast, but it was new to them. So that's a new to the company development. Improvement of an existing product, right? We talked about the Popeye sandwich. They used to have a po' boy, and that didn't sell very well. So they improved an existing product, and now this sandwich is selling like crazy. Extension of a product line. That was the 3rd one we talked about. We used the example of McCafe from McDonald's. They had shakes, they had coffee, but now they came up with this whole new McCafe line. So they extended their product line. And then finally, a new to the market product. And we use the example of ride sharing. Ride sharing was a whole new industry, and it was popularized by Sidecar, who no longer exist, right? It's now obviously Lyft and Uber, but Sidecar was the one that really pioneered the ride-sharing industry. So that was a new to the market product development. So those were the 4 different categories we talked about. Excuse me. Diffusion of Innovations. So this was a theory that we went over, and it really speaks to how, why, and at what rate new technologies and new ideas are adopted. Okay? Adopted, diffused, same term. So when it says diffusion of innovations, it's really how those innovations are adopted. And according to this theory, there's 5 different customer groups. Innovators, very few people who will essentially try anything. Early adopters are really thought leaders. Okay? A larger group. And then the early majority and late majority. That's most of the people, right? Early majority, really young people, people generally with more money, who are happy to try stuff, but they like to see a little bit more proof. Then late majority, generally a little older. They definitely want to see proof before adopting something. And then last, the laggards, generally older. They won't adopt something until they absolutely have to, if they do it at all. So this theory just says people are broken into those 5 categories, and that's how new ideas and new technology are adopted over time. They go through each of those categories. Then we talked about the product life cycle, and also advertising and how that impacts the product life cycle. And we said most products go through that cycle. Introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. That could be a 200-year cycle if you're Brooks Brothers, right? They started over 200 years ago. It can be a couple of months if you're Pokemon Go, right? Came, went over a couple of months, or anything in between. But most products go through that product life cycle. And it's important for marketers because your advertising will change based on where you are in the product life cycle. Initially, you just need to inform people about the product, what it is, how it works. Then persuasive. You want them to use it. Here's why you should use this product. Then it moves to comparative. Here's why you should use us and not our competitor, right? So it compares your product with a competitor. And then finally, reminder-oriented. And we use the example of McDonald's there. You've all heard of McDonald's, but McDonald's advertises over $1 billion a year. Why? It's reminder-oriented advertising. So, advertising in the product life cycle. Then utility. We talked about the concept of utility. And utility just means usefulness, or functionality, or being beneficial. And we talked about 4 types of utility you want your products to have. Those types there. Time utility, having your product available in a convenient time, such as being open 24 hours a day. Place utility, having it available in a convenient location, like a Starbucks in a mall. Form utility, just changing a product's composition to fit something that's valued by customers. This kind of goes into designing a product that fits what a customer wants. And then finally, ownership utility. So both multiple uses for a product and just making it easy to transfer it from a seller to a buyer. And we use the example initially of honey for multiple uses. You can spread honey. You can use it as a sweetener. You can put it on pancakes. Multiple uses. So it has lots of ownership utility. And then we use the example of car financing. That makes it easier to get a car from the seller to buyer by providing that financing. So that also brings with it a high level of ownership utility. And then the second half of this chapter, we started with a look at break-even analysis. And we said when you do break-even analysis, the first thing you have to do is identify which of your costs are fixed and which are variable. And we use Subway restaurant as an example, right? And we said variable costs for Subway are things like napkins and plates and all the food and the drink and the straws. Those are costs that change with the level of sales and production. Anytime you make a sale or you produce something at Subway, those are the things that go. Fixed costs, they remain the same regardless of sales volume. Things like rent and insurance and fixtures. You have to pay for those whether you sell one sandwich or not. So the first thing you do in break-even analysis is split your cost into fixed and variable. And all you're trying to do with break-even analysis is to determine the point at which your sales cover your costs. What is the point where our sales cover our costs? And the example we used was, that's right, the lemonade stand, right? We said fixed costs were 20, variable costs were 10 cents just for the cup, the lemonade, and the water. And if we charge the price of $1.10 and we put that into the equation, we need to sell 20 units to break even, right? So that's the example we use for break-even analysis, the point at which sales cover costs. Then the consumer buying process, right? We looked at a 5-step process that consumers go through. And this could be years if you're looking to buy a house. It could be weeks or months if you're buying a car, or it could be seconds or minutes if you're thinking about buying lunch. But typically consumers go through this process. And we said that knowing this, it can influence various things, one of which is how stores are designed, grocery stores are designed. We looked at a video of Target, how Target is set up, knowing how people shop and what stores can do to keep people in the stores and to get them to try to buy as much as possible. And then we ended our discussion of Chapter 10 by looking at ways to protect your products. How can you protect them? And we talked about patents and trademarks and copyrights. And we said a patent protects your ideas to an idea or an invention. So a patent is an idea or an invention, and it's typically good for 20 years. Trademark, words, phrases, symbols, designs, a little bit different. That's what you get a trademark to protect. And then finally, a copyright. That's for original works of authorship. A book, music, a film. That's where you would get a copyright. So 3 different ways to protect your idea. And that was pretty much how we wrapped up Chapter 10. So with that, that brings us, we're still outside everyone, right? So again, this was just the purpose of a quick review to kind of quickly go through what we talked about in these 3 chapters. If you have questions, email me. Happy to answer those. You know the slides are online. You can always go back and look at those videos. Tomorrow, we'll do something very similar with a look at chapters 12 through 14. And maybe we'll be back outside again, right? Right where we were when we did the review. There's our chalkboard. There's where you guys were all sitting, right there. So, appropriate way to end our first review of chapters 8 through 10. With that, take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be back in touch tomorrow.